Look what is finally off the jack stand, y'all. After almost a year of waiting, being patient, putting everything else before this project, I'm finally starting to see some light at the end of the tunnel. I know I haven't covered a lot on this project here lately. It's mainly just been me test fitting, modifying, fabricating, test fitting, take it apart, put it back together. A bunch of repetitive work. I will say this. Suspension work is not my forte. So now I get to start on what I consider to be the fun part. Doing the engine work. I got a few things underneath the hood I got to replace, so we'll pop the hood and take a look at that. If you've been following this project for a while, you'll remember in a previous video I mentioned we have an aluminum radiator to put in it, as well as an electric fan. To go with that, I picked up, of course, new hoses. I got a new water pump. We're going to swap that out, do a thermostat on it. While we're doing the cooling system, we're going to go ahead and replace those heater hoses. I got a new power steering pump. I need to put the pulley on and reinstall the pump. I picked up a set of valve cover gaskets for it. I believe I'm going to swap that Carter AFB out for an Edelbrock, but that might be in a later video. I don't have a carburetor for it currently. I think I have some exhaust manifold gaskets in the shop for it. I have to look and see. I do remember I had an exhaust manifold leak on the passenger side. And reinstall the battery tray. I got a new battery for it. Might have to address those battery cables there. And we got to do something about those transmission lines. So, got enough to keep me busy for a little bit. Let me grab some tools and we'll get started. I've got the old water pump removed, as well as the thermostat and housing. As you can see, I'm replacing it with a new Gates unit. Looks to be a quality piece. I only managed to break one bolt, which was right there in the thermostat housing, which a little heat with a torch and some PB blast and some vice grips that come right out. But that's the good thing about these old big block Mopars. They're relatively easy to work on. It was basically 10 bolts to get this thing completely disassembled. Now you could do this with the radiator in the car, and of course if you had the fan on, that's going to cost you a little extra work, but for the most part these things are, like I said, pretty easy to work on when it comes to engine wise. So now that I got that old water pump out, I'm getting ready to throw this new Gates unit in. We'll put the thermostat back in it. The one that was in it was a 192, which is kind of high for me. Normally I like to run a 180, especially on the big block, just to keep it a little cooler. But the aluminum 3-core radiator we got going in it should help do that. So we're going to put this thing back together. We'll move on to the power steering pump. Okay, I got the water pump installed and the thermostat installed. I want to jump on here and give y'all a few tips. I know a lot of y'all are running the Speedmaster intake or the Chinese jegs intake on a small block Mopar, and you have trouble finding a thermostat gasket. What I found is any big block Mopar thermostat housing gasket will fit them intakes, and some small block Chevrolet gaskets will fit it. So that's just a little quick tip for you if y'all have a small block running that Speedmaster intake and you can't find a gasket to fit that thermostat housing. As you can see, I went ahead and bolted the new power steering pump into place. That is a new unit from Cardone, and it comes with everything but the cap and the pulley, of course. And if you know anything about these federal power steering pumps, that pulley is pressed on there, so you have to have a special pulley remover tool to remove it and to install it. So I went ahead and bought me one of those. Just another tool to add to the arsenal. But upon installation, I wanted to wait and put this pulley on after the pump was bolted up to the motor, because I wanted to make sure the depth was correct as far as my pulley's lining up. When I press that pulley on, I don't want to press it on too far and it not be able to catch the right groove on the crank pulley. So I waited till I had the pump installed on the engine to press it on. Well, upon installing it, I noticed that it was majorly bent, not around. I mean, this thing, there's no way the belt would have stayed on it. I mean, the first crank of the motor, it would have threw the belt off first thing. So, I'll show you what I did to straighten that out. After looking at it closer, I realized that somebody had majorly done tweaked that pulley out. So, I don't know if they was trying to pry it off at one point or what, but somebody has majorly tweaked that pulley. If y'all notice these strut rods down here, that's just temporary. I'm actually using that as a measurement. A buddy of mine, he fabricates a lot of stuff, and I'm going to get him to fabricate me up some adjustable strut rods for this thing. That way we'll have a little bit more adjustment in the front suspension of it. So, and plus the factory ones I had, one of them was bent, and I just wanted to try something different. I mean, there's not many things available for these old C bodies out there, so I figured I'd give my buddy a shot and see what he can't fabricate up. So we're just using that rod right there to get some measurements. But let me show you how I fixed this pulley. If you're going to attempt to do any suspension job, especially on an old Mopar, it's a good idea to go ahead and invest in a press. I picked this one up at Harbor Freight for like 175 bucks. It's a 12 ton, and thank God I did, because I've used it way more than I thought it would. Of course, you had to have it to press out the lower control arm bushings and the upper control arm bushings, but this thing has come in handy and saved me a lot of headache and running back and forth. So if you got a buddy and you're attempting to do one of these jobs, ask him, can you borrow it for a week or two? If not, just go ahead and buy you one. But what I did is I took these plates here and I sandwiched this pulley in between those plates, because those plates are pretty much flat and level. So after I did that, I kept testing it on the car to make sure I wasn't taking it too far out of whack here. You can see in the video how bad that thing is tweaked out. This arm right here is majorly curved. That was the arm that was already bent before, and somebody had, looked like they put a pry bar behind it and tried to pry that thing off, not knowing that it was pressed on. So after that, I put it on top of these two plates and slowly put pressure on it with the press, and then just lightly tap these three mounting prongs here. I don't know what you call these. The center hub of it. Just lightly tap those three prongs to kind of reset the memory of the metal. You might have to do that a time or two, but I'll show you what it fits like now. It's not perfect by no means. It's not going to be perfect, because you should have seen this thing before. It was majorly tweaked. But at least now I think it'll live with the belt on it. And keep in mind, it's not fully pressed on there yet, but you can see it's not too far out of round. That's close enough for the girls we date. So before, it was 10 times worse than that. It was so crooked, I thought I was actually pressing it on there sideways, but after double checking and verifying, I was like, oh, hold up, we got some other kind of issue. So if you don't have a press and it's in the budget, it's worth the money, in my opinion. So let me press this pulley on here and finish this power steering job, and we'll move on to the next thing. Well, we got that installed, y'all. The old pulley puller and the pulley putter worked out pretty good. It's got a little bit of out of round to it, but nothing major. We can live with that. It's 10 times better than what it was. And if you notice, I did put a little grease on the shaft of it to help the install go on easier. So now that's done, I gotta clean up this mud dauber's nest. Old dirt daubers made a big nest behind the crank pulley down there. I had to evict them, so I gotta clean that mess up. And I gotta run and help my dad with something. With his lawnmower. It's messed up or something. So we will get on this after dinner. So y'all hang tight. Okay, I'm back at it. Let me catch you up to base. I got power steering pump installed. Just gotta hook the lines up to that. Water pump installed. Thermostat installed. New heater hoses installed. Looking all awkward in this dirty engine bay. Shot some paint right here where the battery tray goes. I got the battery tray over there. It's drying as I speak. Painted the front radiator, core support. I've got all the holes drilled and mocked up for that thing. So I'm gonna bolt that radiator in. Hook up the overflow tank. Run the radiator hoses. Plumb that power steering pump. And then I'm going to go through basic. Basically, I'm going to treat this thing like I did when I first got it. Like I didn't know anything about it. So I'm going to hook my vacuum pump up to that fuel line. Draw some fuel through it. Make sure there's no debris or sediment in that tank. Before we try to crank it, I got 5 gallons of fresh gas. Going to check the oil. I'm going to temporarily hook up an oil pressure gauge. I'm going to try to fix this factory temperature gauge here so we can have an idea on the coolant. I got to hook up the electric fan and relay, and then I think we should be able to try to light this thing off for the first time in a year. So let me get busy. Okay, here we go, y'all. I got everything buttoned up temporarily here. Heater hoses are good. Radiator hoses are good. Got 2.5 gallons of water in it. I've already spun it over to prime the oil pump. Oil pressure built up. It had 40 pounds of cranking oil pressure. I don't imagine the fuel pump's going to still have any life in that diaphragm. So I'm going to mix up some Berryman's B12 and some chainsaw gas in a squirt bottle. We'll fill this carburetor up. And this thing should bark off. Okay, get a little gas mixture here we're gonna give her a drink of. Now last time I had this thing running, this carburetor did leak a little bit. Hopefully the fuel pump will come back to life. But if not, that's not no big deal. I'm gonna leave y'all propped right here on the front fender. Hopefully you don't fall over. I did check all the fluids. I'll be honest with y'all. The oil didn't look so good. You see what I mean? Sure does look awful milkshakey to me. I'm praying this thing don't have a blowed head gasket. But I don't know a way to find out. And that oil just looks awful sludgy to me, and it's pretty high on the dipstick. So that ain't looking too hot. But nevertheless, we're going to try to crank this thing. So, cross your fingers. drink down the throat here. Still don't see anything in that fuel filter. Another day, another problem, y'all. If you remember in the last video, I was trying to get this old Plymouth to light off, and I eventually did get it to crank and run, only after about catching the thing on fire. The fuel pump, I figured it was going to be dried up and seized up, so I cranked and cranked and cranked and cranked on it, and it never come back to life. I shot some WD-40 back down the fuel line, hoping to soften that diaphragm up, and still nothing. So I moved on to filling up the carburetor bowls with fuel. And after readjusting the timing and several attempts of priming that carburetor, I finally got it to run. And when it did, the fuel pump decided to come back to life, and it was like an old faithful geyser. So I got lucky and dodged a bullet on that one. Didn't burn the car down, didn't burn the house down. But after I let it run for a little bit, I noticed some gray, milky looking oil spewing out of the backside of the engine. I thought, okay, probably the oil pressure line that I got hooked up to that oil pressure gauge, but it wasn't. Come to find out, the valley pan has a rust hole in it. So I swung by AutoZone, picked up a new valley pan, intake gasket set, bunch of shop materials so I can change the oil in this thing, because I don't want to run it any longer on that watery oil. At first I was thinking it might be a blown head gasket on this thing, but now I'm leaning towards somehow it's just got a lot of condensation in the engine, which I don't know how, because it's been kept under cover here. But somehow it's got a lot of water in there. So we're going to drop that oil. Going to change the valley pan. While I got that off, I'm going to go ahead and change the valve cover gaskets. Clean up around the top side of the engine so no debris falls in there. And while I got the intake off, I might debate on putting that wiring intake that I got on there. I'm not sure. While I got that old Carter AFB off, I'm going to look at it. They don't offer a kit for that at AutoZone, but I can order one offline if I decide to keep that. Thinking about swapping and putting the Edelbrock on there, but I'll kind of look at that and see what kind of shape it's in, see how it lines up on that new intake, and if not, we'll just go back with the factory one for right now. Good thing about these big blocks is it's a dry intake, so I mean, it's not that much trouble if you want to swap the intakes on them. You're not going to lose any coolant or get any coolant in your engine oil. So let me get this thing jacked up. I'm going to drop the oil on it. We'll get busy changing that valley pan. I'll give y'all a look at the oil leak I was speaking of. If you notice right below that intake how rusty that valley pan is, well, there's several little pinholes of rust in there, and that thing was just spurting out like a geyser. So let's get this carburetor off here, and we'll get the carburetor off here, disconnect the ignition coil, a few little wires, and we'll pull this intake off. Quick little progress update for y'all. I've got the ignition coil removed, carburetor removed, throttle cable bracket, and I went through here and sprayed some brake cleaner around the top of these valve covers and where the intake meets the heads. As you can see, somebody attempted to do a Craigslist rebuild on this thing. So they spray bombed it with some spray paint, and they didn't tape off anything. So there's, anytime you hit it with brake cleaner or carburetor cleaner, it's going to peel the paint right off. So before I remove anything like the valve covers or the intake, I'm going to grab the shop vac and come in here and suck up some of this trash just to avoid getting any debris inside the engine. Here's a new one on me. Maybe some of you old timers can help me figure this out. As you can see, the amount of oil we have in the valley pan, that is obviously on the wrong side of this valley pan. The oil is supposed to be inside the valley. But I've never seen this. It appears to be some insulation wrapped in aluminum foil. Now I could be mistaken, but I don't think that's factory. I don't know if that's some old timer's attempt to reduce heat from the manifold, or an attempt to stop some of that oil spilling out of the valley pan. Nevertheless, we're going to clean it up. As you can see, it's pretty gunky in here. Another quick update for y'all. As you can see, we got the valve covers and the intake removed. Valley pan's gone. And it's obvious that this thing has seen some moisture. Which, I'm glad it's no worse than this. I was afraid it was going to be some rust inside here, especially on that rocker shaft. But I'm going to clean all this up in the valley. I'm going to clean up those gasket mating surfaces. Clean up the valve covers. Probably shoot a little coat of paint on them just to keep them from rusting. And we'll start reassembling this thing. I'm going to try to be careful not to drop any trash on top of this cam. Let's see if I can get a good picture of it here. I'm not sure how many miles is on this engine. According to the title history, it's pushing close to 200,000. So for what the old car is, it runs pretty good. So I'm just going to clean everything up, reseal it with new gaskets, and put it back together. Okay, I cleaned out the valley. Most of the old gray gunky oils out of there. I went ahead and cleaned up the intake gasket surfaces. And I went ahead and painted the valve covers. Just shot a quick coat of black on these valve covers, nothing fancy. It's kind of hard after I scrubbed them down and saw the patina paint look on these things. I was debating about keeping it that way, but I don't want these things to break out and rust. While I'm waiting on those valve covers to dry, I can address the carburetor and intake situation here. This is the factory carburetor gasket that was on that Carter AFB. And it looks like we should have no problem using it on this intake. The only thing is, we won't have a provision for the choke that's on the factory intake. But that's fine, I can wire that thing open, because the plan is to go with either an Edelbrock or a vacuum secondary Holley. So I'm going to mock this thing up before we bolt it down and make sure everything's going to line up correctly. New valley pan installed. I put some RTV on the back and front trunnion walls. I got it bolted down with those strips. I'm going to let it set up while I go take care of the valve cover gaskets and bolt them back up. And then we'll move on to the intake. Give y'all a quick look at the few modifications I had to make the factory throttle linkage and return springs and all that work. The front one seemed to work out pretty good without any modifications. Of course, these two center bolts on both sides, I had to get a shorter bolt for those. And that passenger side proved to be quite a challenge. This side went in no problem, but the other side's giving me trouble trying to get those tight. It's hard to get a wrench in there. I think I'm gonna have to go grind down a cheap wrench and like a low profile 9/16 fit in there. But on this rear one, I had to space it up, and hopefully that's going to put the throttle cable in line or somewhere close to in line like it was. If not, I can take that spacer out and we can shorten it up some. It's getting dark out here. We got a thunderstorm moving in, but I'm still out here grinding away. We're going to try to get this thing done tonight. Let me go grab this carburetor. Quick update for y'all. I got the carburetor installed. Never mind that goofy long stud. I was short one stud, so I had to use that long goofy one. Hopefully all this looks to be in the correct function order, so we're gonna find out here shortly. Rain's starting to pick up. Like I said, I had to wire that truck open, so rain's starting to pick up here a little bit. I'm gonna climb underneath here and drain this oil, put some fresh oil in it before the ground gets too wet. It ain't much, but I got a little bit of shelter here. I'm grateful for what little shelter I do have. So let me slide underneath here, drop this oil, and let's see. I got to tidy up some of that wiring that goes back to the alternator, put the coil back on it, and then we should be ready to prime that carburetor. Okay, y'all, it ain't pretty, but we got it buttoned up. Checked all the fluids on it, got the carburetor primed. I'm gonna have to do something about that coil tomorrow because I don't like it being that close to the fuel line or the fuel filter. But I got a big super stock Excel in there that I'm probably gonna throw on it somewhere on the fender well over here. I'll tidy all this wiring up tomorrow and anchor down those heater hoses. I got some plug wire routing to do. It's not the prettiest, but it's not laying on the manifold, so we should be able to crank it. So I'm gonna set y'all up here on the front fender. Hopefully you don't fall over, and made y'all wait long enough. Hopefully we can hear this thing fire off. Hopefully you don't fall over or the light doesn't die, because my lights have been running dead. So let's see what she's gonna do. Found issue number one. Throttle won't return. That's the key on. We're just gonna crank it right here at the solenoid so I can see what's going on. And that did not go as planned. Let me do some checking real quick.